continue on with the next session. On technology, there's often constant updating. Unfortunately, in order to keep up with the latest program, the greatest program, the more fast and effective program, you have to constantly update. Whether you're using for children specifically, or if you just want to keep up with something in a business, or keep a certain record up to date and more secure, just constantly updating. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I'm not too sure. I'm not sure. I just know that when you use technology, you constantly have to update in order to keep up, to keep things more effective, to run smoothly, okay? Online and offline, there can be something called lookalikes. People that look like each other online. This can have positive and negative effects. I've seen it, and I know it exists, but people can look like someone else, and people can think, oh, they'll be just like this person or that person, or they'll behave just like this person or that person. Okay, well, I'll put it this way. It all depends on who you know personally and what is true about that individual. And of course, any lookalike person, an individual, is going to have different experiences, okay? So the appearance can look similar, and it can almost kind of frighten you. It's because perhaps it could be a heritage, their genetic heritage. It could perhaps be because that is their conditional cultural upbringing. Whatever the case, lookalikes. And unfortunately, the lookalike thing can mean racism problem for some people. So we got to be careful about that and what that means and how you're supposed to effectively speak to certain individuals. Okay? Behaviors. Certain individuals can have similar behaviors. Yes, it could be partly because of cultural upbringing, it could be partly because of heritage, historical upbringing, just things that seem to have similar behaviors and conditions, conditional upbringings. They went through a similar war. They were former war veterans. They were former genocide victims. They were formerly persecuted for their faith, so their conditions are similar, and you'll see those lookalikes. They're around. They have similar beliefs because of these conditions. Historically, these lookalike individuals and people can look like each other because of history, biblical history, in fact. Maybe they have a Jewish heritage or something. The history can make individual look alike in their own way and in their own sense. It's like a historical effect. What happens through time. The human heart comes out and reveals these things through technology. We can't seem to hide it. Native Americans will reveal how they were persecuted in history, and a lot of lookalikes, Native Americans, will say these different things, the same thing over and over again. Types of technology. There's screen and sound-based technology. Okay? Before the 1980s, there were different types of sounds. There was the various discs and record players and tape players. Oh, they barely came out with DVDs before the 1980s. But they did have the VHS. They had movies, cinemas before the 1980s. They had old shows on the old TVs with the antennas. Those technologies existed, and they had their deceptive nature too in those days. And they had their truthful use as well. So it just depended on how they were used. The basic computer, the non-internet. Oh, they had the old floppy disks in those days. In the old days, they had the word processing equipments. Those types of technologies. Those aren't, without the internet, there is still use of a computer. These days, it seems like the internet is the biggest use of technology. The internet is not always necessary for using your computer. Okay. After the internet. In fact, if you ask me, you can learn more without a use of the internet. Just get out your encyclopedia and read it. You'll learn more that way. After the internet, there's the general World Wide Web. I almost said World War. Okay. World Wide Web. Okay? Many different websites. buying and selling things through the internet, emails and communication on the internet, video conferences and businesses. When it comes to video conference and business, you hope that the people that are participating in those things are truly honest about their conditions, their character, and they're truly identifying themselves as they are, because someone is getting paid in a lot of video conference and business interactions. So you would hope they be true about themselves in those cases. And if you have to participate in those video conferences business, you don't fully agree with the business moral values, I don't know what your job or career happens to be. Maybe you can be an effective witness, but I would not put out random Bible verses at random in your video conference. I would ensure that you do that offline and in person or on a personal level. Don't try to just spew out random Bible verses because you want to be an effective witness at a video conference and the topic is totally about something else. If the topic is about how to effectively overcome cancer, and here you are spewing out random Bible verses, I don't think that's going to be a very good witness, because the topic is about something else. If it's a biblically based video conference, then yes, go ahead and definitely show Bible verses. But if it's a secular job that you're working at, you'd want to wait for personal time to review those things. Videos, photos, blogs, and memes. Those are out there too. So make sure we use those effectively as an effective witness. Make sure that you are truly being who you are and not trying to just pretend to be someone who you're not. You can use the videos and blogs and things to explain who you are as personally, who you grew up around, who you love to interact with, who you are encouraging others to support. You can use those in an effective way. Okay? And you can help use those as a teaching guide or anything. Just make sure it's an effective way to use those things, not just in a random, spew out random this and that. Yes, people have random thoughts and diary thoughts, but make sure it is effective. Okay? Virtual reality, gaming, and those sorts of things. Many Christians probably shouldn't really get too much into virtual reality gaming, because there can be some really bad content in those things. But games in general, like a chess game, I don't think that's an evil force. But if it becomes an addiction, it can be a problem. Playing Pac-Man probably won't damage you morally, but playing a certain game that has a lot of violence and gross things and sexual impurity stuff, you want to probably stay away from those types of things. Okay, there's gambling sites, dating sites, those things, whatever you call it, those are also bad things that aren't always the best things. Gambling sites, I would think a normal Christian would stay away from gambling sites. There's no use for those. Okay. What about after 9/11? Technology after 9/11 in general. The internet was already developed at 9/11. A lot of people were using it in schools and businesses and elsewhere. What about after 9/11? We had to work on terrorism issues. We had to really discern who are we talking to on the internet. Are they being a real person? Are they being conniving? Are they trying to look for something they don't need? Are they going to look for things that they actually need? Are they going to actually support people that they need to support from their communities online? So, after 9/11, we can discern what types of people exist. That doesn't have anything to do with people coming from Middle East causing 9/11. It has to do with, are these people good or evil? There were other terrorists around before 9/11 as well. Other evil people from different nationalities before 9/11. So technology is only encouraging us to discern the types of character within certain individuals.
Remember when it rained in the darkness I remain. Tears of hope run down my skin.
can continue on with the next session. Fact-checking. Of course, there are websites out there that are out there for fun and games and to poke fun at something. And so they'll come up with news stories and different types of stories that are absolutely absurd and out of this world. Some stories are quite obvious to be fake, and some people are media specialists who are quite effective at lying. And they really want you to focus and narrow in on something that isn't necessarily true and necessary to focus on. There's a little bit of psychological manipulation in some media groups and things of that sort. So you want to do double check fact checking. The best resource, of course, is going to be your Bible. You're not going to be able to get anything out of a liar. So, all in all, you need to be aware of this. The lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin. So, it's just like a lying technology media group hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin. So there's today and yesterday, there's these flattering mouth people around. So we need to be aware that they are around. Okay? So, also with the use of technology, there need to be safety checks. Location. Where do you have your computers? Okay, do you have them hidden behind closed doors, or you have them out in the open so parents can know what children are doing, vulnerable people, what they're doing on the technology? So make sure that you know what young people are doing on their internet and different things. Make sure you know what it means to have a smartphone for a child. Is that really a very good idea? I personally don't think it is. Should just overall avoid it, because they can hide those in their pocket and sneak those around, and I just don't think that's really a very good way to use technology. Filtering software. Is that better for the children or for your vulnerable people in your household? Or is just discussions about things? It all depends. All depends on how well you can trust your children and other vulnerable people. Time limits. Do you set time limits for your children in your home? Do you have certain things that you would like your children to listen to on more often? Do you want them to listen to more old-time radio so that they know what that is? Is there certain time encouragements that you want to encourage on the use of technology? It all depends on the time limits or encouragements, okay? Limit the amount of time on certain yucky gossip sites, gossip channels, yucky mocking channels. Anyway, accountability. Youth, relationships, vulnerable, community, life skills. So, are you using accountable people? What type of youth would you want your youth to interact with? What type of other youth would you think are safe and accountable? What type of relationships are safe and not so safe? Okay? If you have vulnerable people that you're taking care of, what types of people would be accountable for their interactions online, offline, those types of things? Community. Is there a community standards in a church? Is there community standards locally? Is there community standards through a school that you have? Accountability standards? Consider those things. There has to be some sort of accountability. Is it good or bad? Maybe your church group has certain accountability standards that are biblically based, but the school, if it's a public school or public community, doesn't have those biblically based standards. You need to consider those types of accountabilities as well. So, we live in the communities. We can't depart from the public community. Life skills. Are they getting more life skills? You can't bake a chicken through a computer, but you can use the computer to learn how to bake a chicken in the oven. So, how are you using your technology? Are you using it to learn how to fold clothes? Or are you thinking that your technology is going to fold clothes for you? You got to think about those things. Life skills are needed. And babies don't feed themselves. vulnerable people don't just automatically get love that they need. So you've got to think about that. Okay. Safety check as well. Should you avoid social networking for children under the age of 13, children that are not engaged to be married. If they start getting to the dating age and they believe that the dating is going to work, they could get vulnerable social networking conditions. So it's better to avoid social networking for children because they don't know who to trust. Parents know what's trustable and not trustable. But yet they should know how to use it, and so they should maybe practice a little social networking, but with certain children, certain individuals that you believe that they can interact with safely. It all depends on what is safe use. Talking with children and the vulnerable about dangers. So make sure that if you are using technology, talk with the children and vulnerable people about dangers. Maybe there's elderly woman who she was born in the World War II era. And of course there was dangers in that era, and there's dangers today. There's vulnerable things they need to be aware of. Make sure you talk to them about those things. Practice safety conditions for children of all. So you should practice using these technologies safely, even as they're being updated. Make sure you practice those things, because updates, even though the computer is moving more quickly and efficiently, doesn't mean that the vulnerable people are going to keep up with that and understand it. So make sure that you practice safe interactions in these technologies. Okay, as far as also safety checks is sexuality and relationships. So just because we're in a new age doesn't mean that somehow the sexuality has changed as well. Nope. Sexuality and relationship conditions, yes, we can learn about different cultural conditions, but guess what? We're the same. We're in the same status historically in ancient people, Cain and Abel days. We're just as vulnerable to STDs and junk, the junky stuff, junky fake interactions, fake relationships that are not real. They're a fake identity. They're not telling who they are. You need to be very careful about that, because it could hurt a family. They could be very scary and be terrorist encouraging. They could ask for a marriage that doesn't mean anything. So you need to be very careful about that. Sexuality and relationship conditions. They're the same issue in history, as God is the designer of sexuality and relationships. He's the one who designs it. So we needed to give it to him. He's the one who is the safest at describing how to establish a proper relationship and how to properly control sexuality so that it's holy and not just scatterbrained relationships that we don't need or want in our life. Okay. Schools. Some schools are not as strict on guidelines as parents can be. Some schools that children are asked to go to or need to go to don't believe the same things about technology as the parents, or a certain church group or faith group, and they still have to use a certain school. So it all depends. Even certain faith schools might not be as strict. Sometimes more internet use than is necessary for good quality education in certain schools. So we need to know if that school is using technology excessively and they should be doing some other things. They're using way too much time on nonsense games when they could be going out and doing something else, like going to discover rocks or something. Even a homeschool, just because it's homeschool doesn't mean it's all good school. So they'd be doing too much internet nonsense instead of effective use. Peer pressure in the schools. Is there peer pressure to get phones or certain social networkings? So sometimes schools can have peer pressures to use the internet in a way that shouldn't be used. So be aware of that. Okay, here's an old technology. Knowledge is from old resources, the old technology of books, encyclopedias, public libraries. That is fine. You can use those technologies. Consider it in gaining knowledge. You'll probably get just as much in better quality information than from a internet. But yet, it's easy to get an online book as well. Get a Kindle. Face-to-face contact is for social safety. So consider face-to-face contact. Okay, I'm going to stop for a little bit. I'm going to continue on in a little bit. Okay, this should be the last session about technology. I started talking about face-to-face contact is for social safety in general. Okay? If the people agree upon moral values. Now, sometimes you're in a social situation and it's not so safe. As a child, there's a bullying situation or something like that. And obviously, when a person is bullied and pushed around as a child, there's some moral values that aren't right somewhere in the mix. Just read through the Psalms and the Proverbs and you'll probably be able to discern what the moral problem happens to be. This happened historically, any conditions in history, and any conditions even today. Bullying isn't a mystery. The Psalms and the Proverbs describes everything perfectly, especially Psalms 22. It shows what wicked men did to Jesus on the cross. So, okay, but face-to-face will ensure that the evil is not present, okay? If people have biblical goals in mind, face-to-face is for social safety. If people have the biblical goals in mind, that's for good social conditions for Christians. If you're able to meet together, 2 or more gathered together, that is our social safety net. If it's just 2 people that you can meet with, then that is for your social safety. You pray together, you can start being effective witness in your local area and start building up those good positive interactions. You need a social safety net that's face-to-face. Face-to-face interactions have not always been a safe way to communicate and interact. Obviously, this is even in the Bible, and it was true in the history, and it's true today. Psalm 23 and other Psalms is indication of those conditions for historical and biblical people, for Christians alike. So historically and biblically, the people have faced evil men in the history. David and Goliath, there's a bad guy there. They were face to face. So Jesus himself was face to face with evil men without the use of one piece of computer technology. He was still face to face with evil men. Now these evil men, and sometimes women, can show up in church groups locally. Oh my, where do these evil people come from? They show up anywhere. They can show up in our business interactions, our school interactions. You just come across these angry tongues, angry technology interactions. Same technology, same conditions, evil this, evil that, wicked this, wicked that. Of course, some people just need a good break. They need a counselor, a special counselor to overcome their issue, whatever it happens to be. And some people do have biological conditions medical issues, and we need to know what those are, or they could have a something that just brings up these evil forces. Something from history triggers them. Whatever the case is, face-to-face interactions are for social safety, but that doesn't always mean that face-to-face interactions in history have always been good. Just ask Martin Luther King Jr. what he thinks about face-to-face interactions. Then we know. Okay. God's laws and ways are still an effective guide. They're still effective. You can use God's laws as a guide in how to effectively use technology. All 600 plus God's laws will give you ideas on how to effectively use technology. If you use your technology to help overcome the burdens of others, many times God's laws wants you to help use that technology to help overcome the weak, the feeble, the poor in your communities. Read through those laws. Those ideas will help build up the necessity to know how to encourage others to do better, morally speaking. And then, of course, go to the Sermon on the Mount and other things that Jesus said. See what he says on how to effectively use technology, overcome oppressions. You can use technology to overcome oppressive elements of society. Just exposing the evils of certain political groups that exist. Like there are extreme racist groups out there. There are extreme religious cults out there. You can use technology in an effective way if you know God's word in a good way. Okay. Safe household technology guides. Now, I would encourage you, if you are in a godly household, and you are the head of the household, or you are the godly person in the household, with one of the spouses is saved and another one isn't, I would encourage you to discuss with the children and vulnerable people in your household how to safely use the technology. Carefully examine if they understand your rules and your guidelines. Are these vulnerable people and children being honest with you in their interactions about their use of technology? Have them repeat back to you the instructions that you gave to them to know that they are understanding how to use the technology effectively and safely in your household. Okay? So I think that about covers most of the topics that I have for you. And as I said before, technology is not a negative thing, it's not a positive thing. It is a neutral element, and it's a tool that is the same as the same tool that Cain and Abel had to deal with. Unfortunately, Cain didn't understand how to effectively use the technology of the rock. He thought that the solid rock, wasn't watching, but the solid rock in fact was. Okay. Thank you for your time, and consider that God is watching everything we do, and we are using everything for the light of eternity. Have a good day.
Such a time.